The first thing Walter Griggs did every morning was glare at the sun like it had offended him personally. He sat in the same creaky wooden chair on the porch of his small, weather-beaten house at the edge of Maple Street, wrapped in an old brown cardigan no matter the season, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes narrowed at the world as if he expected disappointment and wanted to catch it in the act. Most mornings he did. Kids ran too loudly on the sidewalks. Neighbors let their dogs bark too long. Teenagers littered. Cars sped through the stop sign at the corner. People smiled too easily, Walter thought, as if they were pretending life was softer than it really was. He was 74 years old, with a back that ached when rain was coming, knuckles swollen from years of factory work, and a face permanently lined into a frown so deep it looked carved there. The people in town knew him as the man who never waved back. "Morning, Mr. Griggs," little Emily Porter chirped one spring day as she skipped past with her backpack bouncing behind her. Walter grunted. Emily paused. "You know, if you smile, it makes your day better." Walter looked at her over the rim of his mug. "And if you watch where you're walking, you won't trip over that crack in the sidewalk." Emily looked down just in time to hop over it. "Thanks," she said brightly, then ran off. Walter blinked after her. Even his warnings came back as gratitude. That irritated him more than it should have. Inside his house, the silence pressed in like dust. The wallpaper was faded, the clocks ticked too loudly. Every room held old memories he never touched. A wife who had laughed in the kitchen once. A son who used to leave muddy footprints by the door. Both gone now, one to illness, one to distance. Walter had learned a long time ago that the world took what it wanted. It took youth, it took health, it took people, and then it had the nerve to keep moving like nothing happened. So yes, Walter was bitter. As far as he was concerned, bitterness was just honesty after enough years. At 9 o'clock sharp, he walked to Benson's grocery with a canvas bag under his arm. He always walked, said it kept the blood moving, though he secretly liked the routine more than he'd admit. The town was waking up around him. A bakery door opened and warm cinnamon drifted into the air. A mechanic laughed with a customer. A young mother struggled with a stroller while holding the hand of a toddler. Walter muttered to himself, "World's one loose screw from falling apart." "Morning to you too, Walt," called Frank Benson from outside the grocery store. Frank had owned Benson's for 30 years and somehow still acted like everyone was an old friend, even if they weren't. Walter stopped at the entrance. "Your tomatoes were soft last week." Frank grinned. "And yet you came back." "Because I don't trust the chain store produce." "That almost sounds like a compliment." Walter walked past him without answering. Inside, Walter collected his usual: bread, canned soup, eggs, black coffee, and a single apple. The same items every week. Predictable. Safe. No surprises. At the register, a teenage cashier with a nose ring and tired eyes scanned his items. Her name tag read Maya. "That'll be $18.42, sir." Walter handed her a 20. She frowned at the screen. "Oh, no." "What?" I put in the wrong amount on the last customer and my drawer is short. I'm sorry, I just started here. 1 second." Frank came over. "What's going on?" Maya swallowed hard. "I made a mistake. I'm short $12. Walter crossed his arms. "$12? You can't count change?" Maya's face flushed red. "I said I'm sorry." Frank sighed, but kept his voice gentle. "It's all right. We'll fix it." Walter saw the girl's eyes glisten. Something about it annoyed him, not because she was upset, but because it reminded him how fragile people seemed now, or maybe because she was trying not to break in front of strangers. He pulled a 10 and 2 singles from his wallet and slapped them on the counter. "Take it." Frank blinked. "Walter, it's taking too long." Maya stared at him. "Sir, I can't." "You can. And next time, use your head." She nodded quickly, wiping at her eyes. "Thank you." Walter grunted, took his bag, and left. Outside, Frank caught up to him. "That was kind." Walter snorted. "No, that was efficient." Frank smiled like he didn't believe him for a second. Walter hated that smile. By the time he got home, clouds had rolled in. A hard wind rattled the tree branches, and the first drops of rain began to fall. He reached his porch and stopped. There, on the top step, sat a foil-covered plate with a sticky note. "Mr. Griggs, Mom made extra blueberry muffins. Thought you might like some. Emily." Walter stared at the plate like it might explode. He looked down the street. No one. He picked it up carefully and brought it inside. He peeled back the foil. 4 muffins, still warm. He frowned. He hadn't done anything for that girl. Not really. A warning about a sidewalk crack wasn't kindness, it was common sense. He broke one muffin in half anyway. It was soft, sweet, and far too good. He ate all 4 before lunch and spent the rest of the afternoon annoyed at himself. The next day he found a dandelion shoved into the crack of his porch railing. No note this time. The day after that, someone had moved his trash bin back up from the curb after pickup. The day after that, he noticed his front gate, which had been sticking for months, swung open easily. The rusted hinge had been oiled. Walter stood there gripping the gate. He looked up and saw a lanky teenage boy across the street pretending not to watch him while fixing a bike. "Was that you?" Walter barked. The boy looked up. "Was what me?" "My gate." The boy shrugged. "It was squeaking." "So?" "So it was annoying." Walter squinted. "What's your name?" "Jalen." "Well, Jalen, don't go around touching other people's property." Jalen smirked. "Then oil your own hinge." Walter opened his mouth, then closed it. The boy went back to his bike. Walter stood there longer than necessary. That night, rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like gravel. Around midnight, the power went out. Walter cursed in the dark, feeling his way through the hallway with a flashlight. His knee buckled halfway to the kitchen, pain shooting up his leg so sharply he had to catch himself on the counter. "Damn it!" He stood there, breathing hard. The pain didn't go away. By morning, his knee had swollen badly. He tried to walk it off, but every step felt like a nail driven under the kneecap. He told himself he didn't need help. At noon, there was a knock at the door. He ignored it. Another knock. Then Emily's voice. "Mr. Griggs, we saw your porch light didn't come on last night. Are you okay?" Walter stayed silent. The door opened an inch. "Mr. Griggs?" Rachel Murray's voice. "Walter?" He should have yelled, should have told them to leave. Instead, he said, "I'm in the kitchen." Rachel rushed in, Emily close behind. One look at Walter leaning against the counter, and Rachel's face changed. "Oh, my goodness! Sit down." "I'm fine." "You're not." "I said, you're pale, you're sweating, and your knee looks awful." Walter opened his mouth to argue, but Emily had already fetched a chair. Rachel crouched to inspect his leg. "You need a doctor." "I need people to stop making a fuss." "Too late," she said, already pulling out her phone. Within 15 minutes, Jalen was there to help get Walter into Rachel's car. Frank Benson closed his store for 20 minutes to bring over Walter's house keys and lock up for him. Maya, the cashier from the grocery store, sent over a thermos of tea through Frank because hospitals are freezing. Walter sat in the passenger seat, stunned into silence. He looked at Rachel driving, at Emily in the back seat swinging her feet and humming, at Jalen following behind on his bike because he insisted on making sure they got there. He felt something unfamiliar then. Not gratitude exactly, more like confusion. Why were they doing this? He hadn't earned it. He wasn't pleasant. He wasn't useful. He certainly wasn't lovable.
The doctor said it was a bad strain made worse by his arthritis. No break, thankfully, but he'd need a brace, rest, and no long walks for a while. When they got back to his house, Walter said stiffly, "You can all go now." Rachel folded her arms. "Absolutely not." "What?" "You're barely standing. Who's getting your groceries? Who's making sure you don't fall in the shower? Who's changing the light bulb in your hallway before you trip over your own stubbornness? I've lived alone for 11 years, and today you don't have to." Walter stared at her. Rachel's expression softened. "You don't have to do everything alone just because you're used to it." That sentence hit him harder than the knee pain. He looked away first. For the next week, the town kept showing up. Emily brought drawings she
taped to his refrigerator. Crooked flowers, bright suns, stick figures with impossible smiles. Jalen fixed the loose board on Walter's back steps and pretended he only did it because it was a hazard. Frank dropped off groceries and stayed to argue baseball. Maya came by after work with soup she swore she didn't make herself because that would be weird, though it clearly was homemade. Even the mailman started checking in. Walter had no idea what to do with it. At first, he responded the only way he knew how, with grunts, criticism, and complaints. "This soup needs pepper. That nail's crooked. Kids these days draw dogs that look like potatoes." But the strange thing was, nobody left. They laughed. They rolled their eyes. They came back anyway. One afternoon, Walter sat in his chair by the window while Emily colored at his kitchen table. "Why do you keep coming here?" he asked suddenly. Emily didn't look up. "Because you're lonely." Walter stiffened. "I am not lonely." She nodded like she hadn't heard him. "Mom says lonely people sometimes act mad because it's easier." Walter stared at the side of her face. "Your mother says too much." She shrugged. "She's usually right." Walter looked out the window. The street glowed gold in the late afternoon sun. Neighbors waved to each other. Someone was mowing a lawn. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere a wind chime sang. He had spent years looking at that same street and seeing only noise, only carelessness, only proof that the world was irritating and chaotic and selfish. But now, through the same window, he saw Rachel carrying groceries for an elderly widow 2 houses down. He saw Jalen stop his bike to help a little boy whose shoelace had come undone. He saw Frank hand a bag of bread from the back of his truck to a man Walter knew had fallen on hard times. He saw kindness happening everywhere, in small ways so ordinary they were easy to miss. Had it always been there? Or had he simply refused to see it? That night, Walter didn't sleep much. He sat in the dark living room, the old clock ticking on the mantel. His wife's photograph sat beside it, dusted but untouched. Margaret had always believed people were better than Walter gave them credit for. He used to call her naive. She used to laugh and say, "No, Walter, I choose what I water." At the time, he hadn't understood. Now, sitting in the half-light with a brace on his knee and a town unexpectedly holding him up, he finally did. The next morning, Walter did something no one on Maple Street had ever seen. He waved first. Mrs. Delgado, watering her roses, nearly dropped the hose. "Good morning, Walter," she called, stunned. Walter nodded awkwardly. It felt ridiculous. Then, oddly, light. That afternoon, he spotted Maya outside Benson's grocery, sitting on the curb with her face buried in her hands. Walter would once have walked right past. Instead, he stopped. "What's wrong?" She looked up quickly, embarrassed. "Nothing." "That's a lie." She laughed weakly through tears. "My car won't start. I'm late for my second shift. If I miss another shift, they'll fire me."
Walter grunted. "Where's your car?" She pointed to an old sedan in the lot. Walter limped over, inspected it, and popped the hood. Years in the factory hadn't made him a mechanic, but he knew enough to recognize a loose battery terminal. "Hand me that wrench," he said. 10 minutes later, the engine coughed alive. Maya gasped. "You fixed it." "I tightened a connection. Don't make it sound heroic." She smiled, wide and real. "Thank you." Walter hesitated. Then he said, "You helped me when my knee was bad." "I brought tea." "You showed up." Maya's eyes softened. Walter shut the hood. "Don't waste time crying when the problem can be solved." She grinned. "And if it can't?" Walter looked at her for a long moment. "Then you let people help." The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. But once spoken, they felt true. Days turned into weeks. Walter's knee improved. His walks returned, slower than before, but steadier. And something in him, something hard and knotted for years, began to loosen. He started carrying an extra bag of birdseed to scatter in the park because Emily liked watching sparrows. He repaired Mrs. Delgado's porch railing before she could ask. He started leaving exact change at Benson's, and once an extra 5 in the tip jar with no comment. He taught Jalen how to fix a lawnmower carburetor. He told Frank the tomatoes were acceptable, which Frank announced to the whole store as the highest praise he'd ever received. But the biggest change came on a gray Tuesday morning when Walter reached the bus stop near the library. A young man in a wrinkled suit was pacing there, talking under his breath, panic written all over his face. His briefcase sat open on the bench, papers spilling out into the wind. People passed by. Some glanced. None stopped. Walter almost kept walking. Almost. Then he remembered Rachel's words. "You don't have to do everything alone just because you're used to it." He sighed, muttered, "Idiot," though he wasn't sure if he meant the young man or himself, and bent to help gather the papers. The young man startled. "Oh, thank you, sir. I'm so sorry. I have an interview in 20 minutes, and my car died, and the bus is late, and I think I've ruined everything." Walter handed him the papers. "First, breathe." The young man took a shaky breath. "Second, panicking won't make the bus come faster." "I know, I really need this job." Walter looked down the road. No bus in sight. Then, against every habit of the last decade, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his house key, and handed it to the young man. The young man stared. "What?" "My truck's in the driveway. Old blue Ford. Starts rough, turns left a little loose. Bring it back when you're done." The young man stared like Walter had offered him the moon. "I can't take your truck." "You can, or you can miss your interview. Choose quickly." "Why would you do that for me?" Walter looked at him. Really looked. Saw fear, hope, exhaustion, pride hanging on by a thread. And for the first time in years, Walter answered without bitterness. "Because the world's hard enough without us making it harder for each other." The young man's eyes filled. I don't know what to say." "Say you know how to drive stick." He laughed through tears. "I do." "Then go." The young man took off running. Walter stood at the bus stop in the wind, his knee aching slightly, his hands shoved in his pockets. For some reason, he smiled. A real one. Small, rusty, unfamiliar, but real. 3 days later, the young man returned the truck washed, filled with gas, and with a handwritten note tucked on the seat. "I got the job. I don't think I'll ever forget what you did for me. I was starting to believe nobody cared anymore. You proved me wrong. Thank you." Walter sat in the truck for a long time reading that note. Then he laughed softly to himself. Because that was the strange thing, wasn't it? All those years he had thought the world was cold, thought people were selfish, thought kindness was weakness and optimism was foolishness. He had spent so much energy being angry at everything he couldn't control: the greed, the cruelty, the unfairness, the losses, the disappointments, the endless ways life refused to be what he wanted. And while he was busy cursing the darkness, he had overlooked the simplest truth of all. No one person could fix the whole world, but any person could warm the small piece of it within reach. A porch, a grocery store, a sidewalk, a neighbor, a stranger at a bus stop, a child with muffins on a porch for a man who never smiled, a teen with a wrench, a woman who refused to leave him alone when he needed help. Kindness didn't erase grief. It didn't undo pain. It didn't make life fair, but it made life bearable. And sometimes that was even more powerful. That Saturday, Maple Street held its annual block gathering in the cul-de-sac. Usually, Walter kept his curtains shut and pretended he didn't hear the laughter. This year, he walked there himself. The conversations faltered when people noticed him. Frank nearly dropped a tray of burgers. Rachel smiled first. "Well, look who came." Walter cleared his throat. "Don't make a scene." Emily ran up and grabbed his hand. "You came." "I can still leave." "Nope," she said. "You're trapped." Jalen snorted from beside the grill. "That's what happens when people like you, old man."
Walter opened his mouth with a comeback ready, but then he looked around. At the folding tables crowded with casseroles and pie, at the children chasing bubbles, at neighbors laughing under string lights, at ordinary people with ordinary flaws still choosing, day after day, to carry each other in little ways, and something inside him settled. Not perfectly, not all at once. He would still wake up with aching joints, still miss Margaret, still feel the sting of his son living too far away, calling too little, still see plenty in the world worth grieving. But now he also saw something else, proof that bitterness was not wisdom, it was just armor. And armor might protect you from hurt, but it also kept out warmth. Walter took a slow breath. Then, to the utter shock of everyone on Maple Street, he tapped a spoon against his lemonade glass. "Can I say something?" The crowd turned. Frank grinned. "This ought to be good." Walter glared at him, then looked around at the faces waiting. For once, words didn't feel like enemies. "I've spent a lot of years," he began, "thinking the world was rotten." A few people exchanged glances but stayed quiet. "I thought people were careless, selfish, too busy looking out for themselves to care about anyone else." He paused. "And some people are." He heard a few chuckles. "But I was wrong about something important." His voice roughened. "I thought because I couldn't change the whole world, there was no point trying at all. I thought if I couldn't stop all the cruelty, all the loss, all the unfairness, then kindness was just a drop in a bucket." He looked at Emily, at Rachel, at Jalen, at Frank, at Maya standing near the edge of the crowd with a paper plate in her hands. "But the truth is, drops matter. They matter a lot. You may not be able to control what kind of world wakes up tomorrow. You can't stop every bad thing. You can't force people to be decent." He swallowed. "But you can control whether you are." The street had gone completely still. Walter continued, quieter now. "You can be the person who helps, the person who notices, the person who softens the day instead of hardening it. And I've learned that when enough people do that, the world doesn't seem so cold after all." Emily beamed. Rachel wiped at her eye. Frank muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." Walter lifted his shoulders in a small shrug. "That's all. Also, Frank still overcooks his burgers." The crowd burst into laughter. Frank pointed a spatula at him. "There he is." The laughter rolled through the evening air like music, and Walter laughed too. Not because life had suddenly become easy, not because pain had disappeared, but because for the first time in a long time he understood something simple and beautiful. Hope in humanity isn't found by waiting for the whole world to become perfect. It's found in the small mercies people choose every day, in the hand that reaches out, in the door held open, in the meal shared, in the ride offered, in the gate repaired, in the child who leaves muffins on a porch for a man who never smiles. It's found when someone decides, despite everything, to be kind anyway. Months later, when winter crept in and the first frost silvered Maple Street, Walter still sat on his porch in the mornings. Same chair, same mug, same cardigan. But now, when the sun rose over the rooftops, he no longer glared at it like an enemy. He watched it like a witness. People still passed. "Morning, Mr. Griggs." "Morning, Walter." "Nice day." And now, more often than not, he answered. Sometimes with a nod, sometimes with a full sentence, sometimes even with a smile. One morning, Emily stopped on the sidewalk below his porch and called up, "Mr. Griggs, Mom says we're dropping off soup later." Walter leaned back in his chair. "Tell your mother I'm not helpless." Emily giggled. "She says you're not, but you're bad at accepting love." Walter opened his mouth, then shut it, because once again the child was annoyingly correct. He shook his head. "Fine, but if it has mushrooms, I'm sending it back." Emily grinned and ran off. Walter looked out over the street, a mailman waving, a dog pulling its owner too fast, Jalen helping shovel a driveway, Rachel loading donation boxes into her trunk. Life in all its noisy, messy, imperfect stubbornness. Still flawed, still unfair, still beautiful. Walter took a slow sip of coffee and let the warmth settle into his chest. He had spent years believing the world needed to change before he could feel peace. Now he knew better. The world might always be wild. People might disappoint you. Pain would come, as it always had. But no storm, no cruelty, no grief could stop a person from choosing what kind of hands they would move through life with, closed fists or open palms. That was the power no one could take. That was where change began. Not in grand speeches, not in controlling everyone else, but in the smallest decisions repeated over and over until they became the shape of a life. Walter looked at the dandelion growing stubbornly through a crack in the porch step. Months ago, he would have called it a weed. Today, he smiled at it. Funny thing about the world, he thought. Sometimes it looked cold only because you forgot you were carrying the warmth. And with that, Walter Griggs, once the bitter old man who believed kindness was wasted on a cruel world, rose from his chair, picked up the second thermos of coffee he'd started making every morning, and shuffled down the porch steps towards Mrs. Delgado's house. Her husband had been sick all week. She'd been up all night with him, and whether she asked or not, she was getting fresh coffee. Walter knocked once, thermos in hand, as the winter sun climbed slowly behind him. A small act, a simple choice, a human one. And in that quiet moment, on that ordinary street, the world did not change all at once, but one corner of it grew warmer. And sometimes that is how humanity is saved, one kind person at a time.